Hi and welcome to the Composer Wellbeing Collective Conversations. The Composer Wellbeing Collective aims to raise awareness and provides support for the wellbeing of composers and music creators. I'm Emily Richardson. I'm a music supervisor and composer agent and a co-founder of the Composer Wellbeing Collective. And with us today are Benji Merrison and Ollie Howell, who are also co-founders of the Composer Wellbeing Collective. And joining us is Paul Saunderson, who is a film composer. Paul, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Been doing this, I guess, professionally since I was 22, so I'm 33 now, so yeah, 11 years, and got into the industry in, I guess I'd say, quite a traditional route, and that was sort of via assisting a composer called Ilana Shkeri. I was just starting off, sort of moved down to London, wasn't even sort of living here, just kind of on a whim, really, and interning and doing assistant mixing, assistant to him and to score producer Steve McLaughlin. There was always lots of different projects coming in through the door at lots of different levels, so which meant that there was lots of opportunity for me to get stuck in, and I already knew quite a large amount of tech on that side of things, and so I was just sort of, making myself useful, and always there was that sort of feeling of making yourself indispensable, and so so if you weren't there for some reason, they'd be like, oh, where's that? Like, oh yeah, and so suddenly make yourself wanted. And then just sort of, working up, learning both sides of the recording aspect of everything. And then after doing a lot of additional writing for Elan, getting more of my own work. And it was, it's a great sort of way, I know there's lots of different avenues, and I know Ollie and Benji have come different routes through bands, or I know when I did it, just learning from a composer meant, it was kind of like an education at the same time, and you can get it wrong without being at the forefront of, having to be the face of anything going wrong, so you're sort of protected in that way. But it's, to now, it was an invaluable experience, and from how to like produce a film score right from beginning to delivery.
Tell us some of your most recent projects. I know that you've worked on a couple of quite big ones recently.
So recently I had collaborated on a TV show called Life for the BBC, which played in August time. All that post-production was happened during this pandemic. It's literally in March time. Luckily, everything had been filmed, and then post-production just continued all remotely. Then also worked on a TV show called Trying for Apple TV. Really fun TV show and it was very well timed because I just had a kid at the same time, and it's about a couple who are trying to have a kid, and so lots of parental humor, and it's hilarious. So those are kind of the most recent stuff that I've been doing, and a couple films recently. So
Benji and Ollie are actually co-founders of the Composer Wellbeing Collective. And I'd actually like to sort of start there because it would be really great to chat to you guys. You were sort of the first, actually the instigators of the whole thing. And it would be interesting to talk to you about what kind of led to the creation of the Composer Wellbeing Collective in both your careers. What made you think that this is something that the industry needed?
Yeah, so I think the Composer Wellbeing Collective came out of numerous kind of organic conversations over a period of time. I think one of the very first was between myself and Natasha Polland, who's been on other events that we've done. I would just finished a project that she'd been involved in commissioning, and we were talking about the pressures, effectively, sort of over a nice breakfast. We're talking about the pressures on composers, and especially composers who are on their own, working on their own, and sort of at the mercy of the industry, and just having a general chat around that. And we realized that there wasn't really an impartial, it didn't feel like there was a really impartial, safe space for composers to go and air their frustrations, or check, am I going mad because of this thing, or how do you deal with that? It really felt there was no support network, whereas performing musicians have the Musicians Union, for example, and other parts of the industry have their support networks. And actually it was it felt like it's even more exacerbated with composers because they don't really have colleagues often. They don't really have other people just to talk to, even if they just have a coffee, at lunchtime and just have a chat through some of their issues with people who maybe don't get it completely, but do a bit. So, and then we started to realize through talking to other people that this is a common issue across the whole industry. So I think and obviously Ollie is involved, and there's numerous other partners that we've had over the course of the last year or two. Originally, it started actually all the conversations started about a year before the pandemic hit, and we had originally wanted to launch in-person events, but obviously when coronavirus hit, we just kind of pushed the button on it and said, look, let's just get something out. Let's get the conversation started so that perhaps when things do open up again, we can get those in-person things going in the wider support network. So that's kind of a synopsis, I think. Don't know, Ollie, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I mean, I came originally from a performing background and then into composition. So I was very aware of like the change of dynamic and the change of like isolation time. That this is again before COVID, but I was used to like playing with people all the time, or like going to a festival. Like there was so much face-to-face time with other people, and like we get that sometimes with composers, but it's so much more isolated. And I became acutely aware of that. And then you've got all the pressures and all of the different voices telling you it should be like this, it should be like this, which again I wasn't used to. I was used to just like composing for some jazz album where I didn't really care if you liked it or not. I was doing it for me. But then it's a really different environment, and then you have all the other pressures to do with like trying to work to temp music and trying to deal with that whole thing, and just like sort of self-doubt of your own compositions and imposter syndrome. There are just so many things, and like you've both said, there just wasn't a space for people to really talk about it constructively. And there's also an element as a media composer of which it's not our fault, but there is an element of competitiveness, because if there's a film or TV show, really there's only one composer. So then when you do meet up with other people, unless there's a really open discussion about the difficult sides of the industry, then everyone's always slightly guarded about it, or has been. And I think that's one of the things I really wanted to kind of break with the Composer Wellbeing Collective, or help to try and sort out, is just having a really safe, impartial space where people can talk about stuff, and there's no judgment. We can talk about the good things as well as the bad things. It's not just like a moan down at the pub where everyone's talking about how rubbish the world is. Like that's not why we're here, and that shouldn't be what we all want to do. So yeah, I think like we've said, we've kind of launched this earlier than we anticipated, but I think we've had some amazing discussions already so far. And yeah, hopefully it's just started the conversation.
Yeah, I think you're completely right. I think we started it with I was saying to Benji earlier, we started it sort of autumn 2019, so before corona was still a beer, it wasn't like there was just nothing. And then we had all these big plans for sort of events and workshops and networking and socializing and meetups, and then it sort of all kind of not happened because of the pandemic. And it's really interesting. I think it's turned into something that we could never really imagine that it has, because not only are we personally here to create this community where we can talk openly and honestly about the pressures of work, and but we are all currently going through it, all of us, and sometimes it sort of feels like earlier I was sort of like, oh god, because I've the last month or so, January is always difficult, and every day is a roller coaster, and I'm sort of thinking, who am I to go on a Zoom and talk about good practices for well-being when I'm struggling myself. But I think it's important to remember that it's a shared experience and everybody's going through it. And whether you're a composer or a musician or someone who works in the music industry like I do, we're all suffering the same things. We've all got the same pressures and the same fears, the same insecurities, and I think having that open and honest conversation, I think you make a really good point, Ollie, that because I'm freelance, so I sort of get the same perspective as you guys. As a composer, you're effectively a freelance worker, so it sometimes feels a bit scary being honest about you know, the pressures and the struggles that you face at work, because you don't want to be seen as weak, or you know, or you want to be seen as, you know, I'm a completely, you know, reliable, responsible, efficient composer, and you know, I'll get the job done, because really you're selling yourself for every opportunity, really, because you're trying to get your work in. But I think that actually can end up being problematic, because no one's really being honest about, you know, the problems that they face. So I think that's kind of what we wanted to do. And I think the more we talk about it, the more we normalize talking about it, and the safer people feel about actually being honest about the problems that they face at work.
So I was just going to sort of, literally just from what you were saying, you know, with the pressures of work and always trying to feel like you have to perform, and like the self-selling yourself thing, suddenly like I mean, I know it's a job and it's work, but that the percentage of the work to fun ratio, you know, we're composers, we work in the music industry, it's supposed to be fun, you know, and it's easily forgotten, you know, and so, and some of the best, you know, some of your best music can come out when you're having fun with it. And so being too concentrated on the work aspect of it and constantly trying to sell yourself, trying to feel like you have to, you know, be that person, can get in the way, I think, of that, and get in the way of your creative flow. I definitely found that sometimes. And then you just have to take a step back and think, a minute, this is like supposed to be fun. We're writing music, you know, like this is great, you know, so, and it should be great. And so it's, you have to remind yourself of that. Anyway, I find that it's important to do that.
I think that's also been one of the things that's been quite difficult. I've definitely found it this year, is that like some of the most fun I have as like writing for TV and film is like that stage before a project begins, where you can just like just try out loads of stuff, just experiment. And like Benji and I will quite often just get into studio and have some mad synth and guitar pedal setups and just track all day, just track loads of stuff, or like get a session player and do an experimental session. But that I mean, you can still do that, but now you're by yourself. There was something about having other people in the room, even if it was just for like a day or for 3 hours, and just having that like kind of jam element. That's for me is the most fun that I kind of ever have. And it has been difficult. Like we've done a lot of like remote string sessions, for example, which is, you know, they've turned out great. The players are amazing, but there's nothing like being in the room and feeling it and hearing it.
Yeah, I think it's a good point though. You know, we shouldn't shy away from talking about the situation right now, because it is it's difficult across the board. And, you know, I think a lot of people are struggling with their headspace, or, you know, juggling, whether it be, you know, children and you know, because it was, in my experience, there's nothing more sort of to take you right out of the creative zone than, you know, a couple of small humans, you know,
changing a nappy,
asking you what, you know, what a quadratic equation is or something. It's like I have no idea. I've got to be honest.
Benji, your kids aren't asking you about quadratic equations, are they? Is that your kids?
Not quite. I'm imagining.
The kids are geniuses.
Yeah. I just thought I'd drop that one in there just for a moment. But I mean, I think everyone is struggling, and actually, you know, to be kind on ourselves and to share some of that is a really useful thing. And also to realize that, you know, no one is quite achieving, you know, anywhere near what they want to be achieving. And actually sometimes good enough just has to be good enough. And also creativity sometimes has to just, and it's an interesting, we were talking yesterday when we thought about, you know, what do you do in these situations where, you know, maybe you're not feeling inspired, or like in this particular instance, you know, it is very, very difficult to maintain headspace sometimes. And, you know, I was saying to you something that I'd be interested to get your reflection on it. Something that I always do in that situation is try and draw down on, you know, the experiences I've had. I try and transport myself to a time when I was feeling creative, you know, in my head somehow. And I just literally almost mechanically do those things. And I go, yeah, I don't feel good about it inside, but actually the client will, because it works then, it probably will work then. And then I'll get my mojo back later on. But I'd be interested to know what you thought about that, Paul, as an idea.
Yeah, I mean, it's because you can find I know I do it, going to the same places if you're like got to a point where you're just like, I'm dead inside, nothing is coming out that's even remotely like interesting. But I, like we were talking, and like with the idea of remembering that moment of like creativity or the most creative times, and literally when, like as you were saying, you know, when you're doing prep, there's no pressures, and you're working with someone, and you get excited and almost like giddy about what you're doing, and you can't sleep because you want to get back in and go and do it. And it's often happens if it's like on a project that is, you know, it's not a project for anyone, it's just for yourself, and you're not being paid to do it. You know, suddenly when like money comes into it, or like delivery dates and performing to something, that it all just seems to go out the window quite quickly, and it just becomes a job. In terms of like creative, like for me, I'm very much into exercise, so I'll often just, like if I'm struggling on a scene, I'll just ham out something roughly, like, because, you know, obviously there's two parts of what we do. It's like film, music, well, there's the picture and then there's the music. You know, I'll be able to see what the shape should be, but what that music should be, it's like I've got no, so sometimes I might just ham out something, or like it's a sketch, like in 5 minutes, and then I'll just go for a run or something, like a 5 mile, 6 mile run, and then I'll be thinking about it when I'm running, or I'll listen to some music, or I don't know, that's my sort of thinking time, just space and doing something different. I find actually, or even doing something that is so demanding on your brain that there's no space to think about anything else. Like I actually find doing something, like, obviously can't do it at the moment unless you go outdoors somewhere, but like doing something like rock climbing, for example, is like, you can't think about anything else apart from what you're doing there, because there's so many different things. And, you know, your mind can't wander. So obviously when you go running, your mind, you're just thinking about stuff and it's going around your head, but like getting clear sort of space, it's almost bizarrely like meditative, because you're just calculating, there's only certain ways you can get through. It's like a puzzle, you know, on the wall, for example. And so I find, like after that, after a few hours, I was just like, oh my God, just like feel completely refreshed, because there's just no capacity to think about anything else. And I, you know, and I think like I recently had a bit of issue with like sleep, because it was like, well, my brain was just too wired, and I was either thinking about like work or just life, or my brain wasn't sort of being stimulated enough in the kind of ways that we used to be able to like vent, or, you know, like these discussions when you can kind of let off some steam, or normally you go and meet some friends in a pub and you know, and just you not talk about music, or you're just talking about something completely different, and then you come back the next day, you're like, all right, I've mentally, you've had a break. But at the moment, it's just sort of every day is exactly the same, and you're still in the same sort of location. You're not going anywhere, and can't travel, can't see anything. There's no sort of extra thing, and so I feel like that lack of stimulation in all those areas is definitely making my brain work a little bit slower than it usually was working.
Yeah, I think you've touched on something quite interesting there. I think that was an observation, at least of mine, not across the board, but I've noticed that a lot of composers can have that type of mind, which is quite busy and constantly on and wanting to sort of, you know, solve problems and stimulated all the time, you know, whether you call it a spectrum or otherwise, but if you know, but you know, it's definitely noticeable, and I do think that type of a mind, you know, and again, this is not across the board by any means, I'm no expert, but that kind of mind can seem more susceptible to sort of mental health problems and cyclic thinking behaviors and all those kind of things. So it's just interesting you brought up. It's certainly something that has come up before.
Well, it's just, you know, it's one of those things, like we as like society, we as human beings are supposed to be with people, and are supposed, you know, we're not supposed to be hermits, and you know, and it's sort of being forced into this way. I mean, obviously we as composers, I know everyone made a lot of jokes about it at the beginning, just like lockdown, same as usual, you know, back into the studio by myself. We've, you know, had immense training for being isolated, because it's such a solitary lifestyle, but at least, you know, as everyone's coming home from their offices in the evening, normally is the time that then we then leave the house to then go and meet up with people, or, you know, and then losing that, you know, it is quite affecting, I think. And I know
we talked, didn't we, Paul, about, you know, a lot of musicians' backgrounds is could be playing in a band or orchestra, quite social, effectively. And then suddenly you know, you enter an industry and get some success, and the industry basically tells you, right, go and sit on your own in a room for 20 years, and you're like, was that it? I know occasionally you get to attend recording sessions as well and speak to the human beings, other musicians.
Yeah, even that, to the record, like that's the fun part of, like, you know, recording. And I know that we can do it all remotely. It's just not as fun, you know. Even if, like, sure, you know, you now obviously you get the same results. Like, even mixing, I've been mixing remotely with my mixer, and it's fine because it's just so fluid. And if I need to dial in, you know, he can share his screen, and I can then adjust, you know, and actually control his computer remotely, and, you know, and mix while he's in the toilet and come back, and you know, and but it's kind of like being there, but it's also, I just enjoy, I miss, you know, part of the fun of that is like going to a different location, someone else's studio, and sort of, you know, wherever it is, or like, I don't know, it's just some sort of niceties about that. And just, yeah, I think it's environmental change, but those are all the fun bits, you know, and you can't do any of those. And also, even like working on a project, the most fun is like all the premieres or the rap parties. That's all scrapped, and so you sort of, you know, you especially at the moment, you're sort of working with a bunch of people who you may be on a whole project and really have only met them in a digital presence, which is sort of seems bonkers, but obviously it is what it is. But it seems very strange. But, you know,
how does this resonate with your sort of current situation as a music supervisor and agent?
Well, I was actually just going to ask. I mean, I find it a huge part of my job is to network with people and meet people and build relationships, and I've not been able to do that, and it becomes very frustrating. You know, at the beginning, I think I went freelance at the beginning of 2020, really, really great timing there. But I luckily, you know, I've been working in the industry long enough that I've built up, you know, a really great, you know, list of contacts who I'm close to and, you know, I trust, and etc. But you're always wanting to build on that and meet new people. And I think like emailing is just not the same. And I feel like I have met a lot of people who I just, you know, I've never met in real life, and I just feel like I personally love to get in front of people because I like to charm them. And I feel like you just can't do that over email. And, you know, in terms of selling things and pitching composers and winning jobs, it's so difficult to do it over an email, because what is it? It's just words on a page, isn't it? There's no, you can't get personality behind it. And I think it's that I really miss that lack of connection that you get with people when you meet someone and you get on. You think, oh, it'd be really cool if we could work together, and it's missing in an email, I think. And I would I mean, I'm not even going to think about it, but you know, it's how much more work do I think I could have got if I had been meeting these people face to face. And I was actually going to ask Paul and Ollie actually, if do you think that do you think it's affecting the amount of new work coming in because you can't get out and meet people? Because we're all in the same position, really. We're all freelancers, and, you know, we create our own workload. So do you think that this has affected you? You're not being able to get out and meet people, or have your past connections kind of just continued and you rely on the people that you know, your network that you already know?
For me, yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it? Part of me thinks yes, but then the other part of me thinks no at the same time. I don't know. It's I sometimes, like, I hate emailing. I'm such like I'll sometimes just like hold my phone and just go through and just start calling up random people just for no reason. And you know, and sometimes I call one of my friends who are very much of like, you know, what do you want? Well, no, I'm just saying hi, you know. But like, I'm trying to sort of network in that way by just sort of hey, do you want to catch up? And obviously everyone's in the same boat. So it would be, I think the answer would be yes, if I was the only one who wasn't allowed to go anywhere. But because everyone hasn't been able to go anywhere.
What you mean? It's like, I think that is the one saving grace from all of the stuff that's going on at the moment, is that at least you're not like the only person that it's happening to.
No, exactly. Yeah. So like the flow of work, I guess it's we're all trying to sort of stay in touch with everyone as much as we can. And sure, there is always that thing where you're just out in Soho town, meeting up with someone, or when someone goes, oh, hey, so-and-so is out, let's go and have a drink with them. They go, oh yeah, I'm working on this thing. Oh, there's someone I know who's working, and then, does that, and with the, obviously those sort of occasions don't happen that much, but like it's, so, and obviously we have people who, are looking after us, who are also hunting for work and keeping an eye on stuff and things that we miss. I know I regularly sort of scour IMDb and just sort of see, what, or, look through previous projects that I've worked on, or just if I've, when you're busy, you don't have time to do that, because it's almost like the last thing you want to be thinking about is, if you're like really snowed under, is thinking about like that next project, which is really what you should be doing, because, if you just work loads and then stop, then you've got nothing to kind of go on to. But I sort of try to stay on top of that, and yeah, just sort of, try to sort of, just sort of call people and just sort of see how they're doing and catch up. But yeah, it's not the same really, because it's a lot more natural and organic going and meeting someone for lunch or a drink, because when you call someone up, there's always, like, depending who it is, there's always an alternative agenda, and there's no kind of beating around the bush about that. And it's so it's a lot easier if you're just out at an event or with some people, and then something comes up and it happens organically.
Is there anything that any of you have kind of started doing since we've been under lockdown or during the pandemic that you've actually found is more a more enjoyable or efficient way of working, that you would continue even if we went back to normal? Is there anything actually positive that you've taken from kind of not being able to get out and about?
I think efficiency is probably not the word I would use for any of the lockdown periods for my own process, that's for sure. It's kind of like just squeeze it into whatever gaps there is, and I guess, focusing in on, for me, it's made me think about the importance of the things that I'm doing to some degree. My time is particularly squeezed, having two little ones at the moment. So if it's not really important, I'm not doing it right now, and I'll pick up on all that stuff a bit later on. But I think, some of the remote collaboration, the Zoom stuff, whilst it is very draining, as has been talked about a lot, actually it's quite convenient sometimes to get. I mean, I do a lot of work with natural history units, and I live in London, so it's sometimes it is a bit of a schlep backwards and forwards, and you can have a meeting where everyone just sort of has a little has a little conflab and says, right, well, it's going to be great, we're going to be brilliant, aren't we? And it's really important, but it's not like it's just a quick catch up about where we're at, sort of thing. So that has been brilliant for those kind of things. So I'd probably suggest keeping some of that, but in general, I think I would certainly propose that it's certainly not been an efficient time of my life. Yeah, don't know how you feel, Ollie.
I mean, yeah, my efficiency and drive for creativity is definitely ebbed and flowed. There's been times where I've kind of got more into the swing of it and been like, oh, actually, yeah, I'm writing loads more minutes of music per day than I did pre-COVID. And then other times when it's every day's just been a bit of a slog. And we've talked before about how to find that kind of route to creativity when you don't feel like it, but we've also got a pandemic to deal with. I had COVID, me and my wife had COVID a month ago or so, and I was helping out doing some additional writing on a TV show, about to start a film, had a feature film about to start, and then I took 2 weeks where I just couldn't do anything, and then when I did come back, I was right, ready to go, desperate to do something creative, and my brain is just moving at like 50% speed at the most, and I'm really struggling. I mean, I'm kind of getting more into the swing of it now, but like that usual thing of just trying to find that space where, oh, okay, that thing worked last time, let me try that. If everything is like moving in slow motion, it's really difficult, and you always have the fear of like, I have no idea how I caught it. I've been really careful, and so then who could, someone else might catch it like that, someone I know, or like, will you catch it again? You've always got that lurking in the back of your head. So it's been really tricky. But in terms of like things I've done differently that I will continue, I've like been a bit more strict about like finishing at a certain time, and like being like, oh, I'm gonna like just go. I mean, like I love cooking, so we'll just, it's not quite rock climbing, but like you can like focus on something else a little bit more intensely that's nothing to do with music, and then if I do come back afterwards, then they've got a little bit of more kind of refreshed head. So yeah, I'll probably stick to that kind of work hours. It's like Paul was saying, I think like 7 o'clock used to be my kind of like end of the day thing, and now I'm like usually trying to start finishing a little bit earlier. So I'll probably try and keep that for as long as I can.
I think, like kind of what Benji was saying, there were parts that are sort of useful, but I wouldn't completely, take everything and stay the way. Like working with a musician sometimes, especially now, loads of musicians have diversified into getting all their gear in, because they had to, and record themselves, and it is like for time efficiency super like useful, as long they've gotten really good, so you can I can call someone, how can you just do a quick vocal on something, or can you do it a little bit on this? They don't have to travel anywhere, they can fit more work into their time because they're cut out with traveling, and you can get the file like instantly, or you do it remotely. But I wouldn't do it all the time, just because I miss that personal sort of, sometimes when you need to explain something a little bit more, it's just you want that sort of but I don't know, you just need to be in the room just to kind of convey exactly what you're after, rather than doing it over Zoom.
Yeah, I think I know what you're getting at, and it's like, I think in some ways we've actually, I mean, first of all, thank God for the, that we've got all this, the internet. So can you imagine if we didn't have any of this, like, internet and being able to do, anything online? I mean, it would literally, the whole world would have completely shut down. So thank God we actually have the facilities to be able to do stuff like this. But I think for me, it's like, I think I have become more efficient, but in becoming more efficient, I've lost the enjoyment of things. Like I remember at the beginning of lockdown, I was like, oh, I actually really love the fact that you can only do a 40-minute Zoom. I think like that's actually changed now, but I was like, I love the fact that you get cut off after 40 minutes, because it means that everything has to be really like succinct in your meeting.
Yeah.
Have a meeting with someone, and it's only going to be 40 minutes. You just got to get straight to the point, done after 40 minutes, and it's finished. And I actually was like, this is really good. Like all the time we spend like faffing around, like talking about stuff that's not important, trying to eke out like minutes, trying to make ourselves feel like we're doing something really important, but really we're just filling time. But actually it's that filling time that was the enjoyable part of the job, and like having a chat and like talking about something completely irrelevant to what the meeting's actually about. And I think we've sort of become more time efficient, but in doing so we've lost some of the enjoyment, some of the interaction that we had. And I think also because of that that efficiency in terms of being able to fit more into our time, I think everything's become a lot more intense. And I think you were sort of touching on that earlier, Paul, that my day has become so much more intense. And my partner, who works in a completely different industry, who does, he essentially has a 9-to-5, his work has now become so intense because there's nothing to distract him from literally just and working all day. Whereas before he would be in an office and he would, he'd get up and go and have a coffee, and he'd have a quick chat with someone, or he'd go over to one of his colleagues' desk and have a quick chat about something. And all that, you don't realize how much all of those things sort of add up to giving your brain and your a break, and your eyes a break from your screen. And they actually over the course of a day, they add up, you know, to a certain amount of time that now we're literally sitting in front of our computers and we have no one to distract us and no one to talk to. That time that we spent chatting and interacting is now spent just at our computers, not staring at a screen. So I think that definitely has an effect on your mental health, I think, and being able to, I mean, I definitely have problems with like quietening, I describe it as just having a busy mind. Like I have so many things going on in my mind, and I find it, first of all, I find it very difficult to like ramp myself up in the morning. I might get into work mode, and then at the end of the day I find it really difficult to switch off, because I just have everything going on, because it's such an intense period of time sitting at my computer doing things, and I've got all these to-dos going through my list, and who I need to talk to and who I need to email, and this thing that I need to do. And then at the end of the day, and also because, I mean, we've spoken about this before as well, the fact that we're not going anywhere to work. We literally, I mean, for me, I literally work at a desk in my living room. So I stand up from my desk and go over to my sofa and sit down. There's no difference from me working to me relaxing. It's all just in the same room. So I think, you know, all these things have an effect on how our mental state is at the moment. And, you know, and I think it definitely is that lack of interaction that is affecting us in so many different ways, not just the social aspect, but, you know, the intensity of how hard we're working, the breaks that we're not taking, etc., etc. So
it's interesting you say about the location of where you're working. It's very important, I think, for, you know, anyone really, wherever they're working, being able to you know, if it's in your house, if it's in a certain room, just shut the door at the end of the working day, because like if you were in an office, the door would be shut and you wouldn't be able to go back in. Whereas like when it's in your home, it's so easy just to be like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna dibble in, and then that keeps your mind going throughout the night. I mean, I used to work in a spare bedroom, and you know, when you're like living in the same place that you're working, it's very difficult to just shut off, and because it's just there. I mean, like obviously it's where I am, it's at my house, but it's at the bottom of the garden. But I do, you know, I lock up, and it's like, right, I'm not going to go back in there, you know, for the rest of the evening. But I think it's very important to, if there's any way of somehow, I know you're in the living room, I don't know, somehow putting a sheet up, or I don't know, like segueing off or something.
My desk is my granny's, my late granny's old bureau, so it actually has a lid. So
right, lock it.
I actually close the lid.
Yeah, that's it.
And that's like me done for the day. But I something that I just thought of actually, because just before we started recording, we were talking about having kids, and even though I feel for all parents during this, Paul and I are very lucky because our kids are nursery age, and thank God nurseries are still open.
Yeah.
So at least we get a break during the day. Monday to Thursday daytimes, like, oh, it's just like bliss in my house.
Weekend. It's the new weekend. Yeah.
On Mondays, I literally need like the morning of Mondays just to recover from having like my daughter at home with me all weekend. It's so intense. But at least I think that one of the benefits of having children is that we are literally forced to switch off at 6 or whatever, because we've got other things that need doing. I mean, obviously we don't then get to just sit down and relax. It's a whole other job, full-time job that we've then got to do. But at least it's something forcing us to actually be like, right, I have to log off now, and I have to go and do something else and step away and interact with my children. But yeah, I think that's probably one of the only positives of having children at home.
I mean, they're so innocent, and just so it's kind of, you know, I think it sometimes brings it back home, really, you know, and especially if you're getting stressed about something at work, doesn't matter, you know, because then you go spend some time with your kids, and then it's just like, oh, that's actually what matters.
It's definitely an area I think we could probably have a whole discussion on it, really, because I don't think it's really been talked about that much, is you know, juggling a role in the music industry composition. I mean, perhaps it has, obviously I haven't scoured the internet, but and being a parent, I think it's one of those things that if anything, this situation has made people more open about talking about their own private situations, whether it be being a parent or having a disability or having mental health problems or whatever it may be. It's made people feel much more comfortable and confident to come out and talk about those other pressures in their life, because I think sometimes with composers there's this idea that they are, I've said this before, I think, I'm not sure I've said it on Zoom, but they're the kind of wizened genius who's all consumed by their, by the power that surges through them and all this music spews forth. But actually the idea that you might also be a mother or a father or, it seems somehow incongruous. So, in many ways, composers probably keep that stuff on a back burner often. Not always. Again, I'm sure there are a lot of composers who are much more sort of visual about that and all of that stuff. But, it's definitely an interesting area. And I think, certainly this pandemic has thrown it into sharp relief, having to juggle those two different mindsets in a way, because that's the way I see it. They are quite different mindsets, and to pull yourself into one and then out of the other, it can be a challenge. Actually.
Yeah, I think actually, Benji, you've touched on something that I think probably unintentionally, but I think we would talk again just before we started recording about the fact that there is still such a discrepancy in male to female composers, particularly media composers.
Absolutely.
And I think maybe that image of, the composer who doesn't have any other responsibility other than sitting in his, I say his because they are, predominantly men, sitting in his studio writing, massive scores and stuff, and that whole family life is kept quite quiet. And that, I think that probably goes for any industry that is male dominated, because I think that is just an effect of being in quite a masculine environment, because we still don't attribute childcare to men, and men on both sides. I think men probably still feel like they don't want to bring that up in their workplace, in any work, because it's still seen as a sign of sort of weakness, that I've got kids to look after. It's that very sort of archaic image of the man is there and he doesn't look after the kids, he just concentrates on work. And I think actually being during the pandemic when kids have been at home, and I think because of especially in couples that both have full-time jobs, the childcare has had to be spread out more equally, and maybe this is a good thing, because it's normalizing the fact that people are parents. People who have full-time jobs and who are film composers are also parents and have other responsibilities, and hopefully it will normalize it, and like you say, we can talk about it a little bit more, about people having lives outside of writing.
Yeah, and I think definitely the impact on women there is probably I'm sure more, I'm obviously not wanting to assume, but as when you have kids, you see the impact on many women's careers through different factors, too many to go into right now, but you see it in sharp relief, and I can only imagine the pressure on a female composer when they do have a child as well, want to quite rightly prioritize the family but also keep their career going. And I think there's probably a whole session on that alone, which I don't think has ever been discussed. But there are quite a few discussions about women composers nowadays, and thankfully that agenda is being pushed, and we are seeing more women come through. But actually, I'm not sure it's ever been discussed about how when you have a family, how that might affect your career and tackling some of those challenges. So it's a very good point.
I guess it's difficult, isn't it? Because I'm sure you've seen firsthand. Whenever you have a kid, it's like that first year. They're kind of, well, for the mother anyway, the kid's so dependent, and even if you're in a full-time, not even in freelancing, but say we're work composers and we're just working for companies, you have paternity leave and you have maternity leave, where some companies would cover a whole year of salary, or half a year, or 3 months, and then statutory. At least there's money coming in, or there's a system set in place, but it's all but so taking into like freelancing, so female freelancers, it's quite like it's very difficult. Like obviously there'd be pressure to get back to work to start getting some money in, whilst also having like a baby, and and so it's very difficult, and I couldn't really imagine, I'm glad, in my situation, I'm the only freelancer in this sort of relationship, but it's which helps. I can kind of work which hours that I need to work, or or make time for it. But it's if you think about the timings of schedules changing, if you're on like a huge movie, that's so demanding, and also it being quite stressful. Stress is not good for a mother carrying a baby, or after, there's so many different things, and and I think you're right, maybe not enough allowances are sort of set in place for that, or it's just that area that so many things that you wouldn't really think of unless you've kind of gone through it, or being anyway one half of a sort of parent, and like I just think it's very difficult.
Yeah, well, maybe if there are any female composers out there who are watching this and have had a family, do let us know, because I think this would be a fantastic panel discussion to try and delve into some of those pressures, because it that undoubtedly would have effect. It's that kind of build up of pressure on your mental health, of that trying to be something professionally, and then having the other pressures tugging in the other direction. I know this is I guess across the board with families, there's a lot of those types of pressures in lots of different jobs, but as we've discussed, has slightly unique qualities, let's say, sometimes.
I know that, it's definitely an agenda for a lot of the women's organisations in the music industry, because it's not just composers, it's any music creator who is even someone who's maybe got a record deal, they're still basically classed as freelance, and they have exactly the same issues that anyone who's freelance who is baby faces. So it definitely is an agenda, and we should definitely cover it at some point, because I think it is something that needs to be addressed on lots of different levels. Ideally, all the way up to government level, needs to be something put in place. But like I was saying, it's interesting, and I'm sure it's been eye-opening, being in a situation where everyone's been working at home, and the balance with childcare between the two people. And I suppose we all have something in common, and that we are freelance. And I think, certainly for me, because my partner has a 9-to-5, and a company that expects him to be at his computer between certain hours, a lot of the responsibility of picking up from nursery, dropping off at nursery, and all those different things. My daughter doesn't go to nursery on a Friday, so Fridays basically for me are basically written off at the moment with in terms of work. A lot of the responsibility has fallen on me, not because I'm a woman, but because I'm a freelancer, and I effectively work for myself. I don't have the responsibility of reporting to anybody. Sorry, someone's at my door. I'm just going to go.
Classic sort of pandemic moment there. I think we should remind ourselves, and this is across the board, that enough has to be good enough right now, and we'll pick up the slack, or the genius, or the amazing masterwork at the other end. And because time pressures are so much, that actually to be kind to yourself and just go, I'm not going to quite, just accept and be calm and comfortable with the fact I'm not going to quite achieve everything I want to in a given day. And do you know what? Everyone else is in the same situation. They're probably relieved that I'm not delivering that extra cue or whatever, because they think, I don't have to bother putting that in the edit now, or whatever it is. So I think being kind to ourselves in this situation is definitely important. I know it's obvious, but it's also very important,
I think that's something that surprised me generally this period. I kind of assumed that, because when you're working with deadlines, and especially with something like advertising where it's like so last minute and they need it an hour ago, I kind of assumed that now they knew that everybody was like working from home, and they had they didn't have the commute time or whatever, that they'd put more pressure on you to do that. But actually I've personally found, films still have deadlines and stuff, but like I feel like people are a bit more sensitive about whether it's kids or just like generally a personal life, or like I have a life outside of what I do. I think it's so easy when when we were in the world before, that people would probably just assume composers are like sat in this luxurious studio and they're working till all hours and they're loving it all the time, and so they don't mind, and they ring you at like 4:30 on a Friday and say, oh, I need this by Monday, and it's going to should take 4 days, but you know, just make it work. Whereas now I feel like everybody can imagine everybody else at home, and they all have dinner and or kids or like just things that they want to do outside of their, you know, whatever they're doing, whether they enjoy their job or not. It's kind of it should be irrelevant, because we all have personal lives. But I feel like people are generally being a little bit more sympathetic to that, which is why it's such a perfect time, I think, to have these conversations around sort of family life and being a parent and stuff like that, as well as just trying to get that balance between work life and personal life.
Yeah, totally. Have you always worked? I was just curious in your like working locations. So, Ollie, are you working in your house at the moment? Or?
Yeah, I'm in essentially like a second bedroom that I've turned into a studio.
Is that always where you were working anyway? I was just curious if it's changed, if you used to rent a place out at all, or if you've moved back into.
When I moved actually into my current house in January last year, so just as everything was, so I was kind of potentially thinking about sharing a studio with a friend of mine and stuff, and then just everything kind of put on hold. But yeah, I worked from home a lot. I do a lot of the writing from home. But yeah, again, like we were talking about earlier, it was the times when I was go to a little studio for the day, or just like go around someone else's studio and jam, or like meet up with somebody and just talk about like that day-to-day location stuff has changed. But yeah, I mean, there are definitely bonuses to working at home. You have more of the family time, but you just, like you were saying earlier, like being able to shut the door, or like throwing a blanket over your computer or whatever you can do is just so important.
It's not there anymore. It's like
it is, I guess, worth remembering that, you know, there are a variety of different people going to be watching this. Some of whom, you know, I mean, I personally have had studios from same thing, literally, you know, a little corner in a spare bedroom, or even the main bedroom, the only bedroom, to I've had studios in London, and I've here where I am now is actually a home studio, to the back of the garden, that kind of thing. But it is worth remembering that people are in different setups, and actually that does put unique pressures. Again, we'd be very keen to hear from anyone who's got ideas or you know, unique things about their own setup. And certainly, if you have got a self-contained space at the moment, that's a real luxury to have. And I think there probably are a lot of composers out there who are working from the corner of a room. That must be putting a lot of additional pressure, I imagine, in terms of juggling that family life or personal life with their work life.
I think what we said earlier about being able to close off in some sort of physical way, being able to shut off particularly like over the weekend, I think is really important. And like I work in the corner of my living room, and I set up a desk in the bedroom for my partner, and both areas are sort of the one in the desk in the bedroom is sort of in an alcove, and you can shut the curtains and close it off. And like I said, my desk in the living room is like a bureau with a lid, and I've made sure that everything fits in it, so that when I finish, I can pack everything away and close the lid, and it just looks like a bit of furniture. And I don't think I even like read it anywhere. I think I just instinctively knew that when we were both working from home, particularly with two separate workspaces, that I wanted to be able, I didn't want our house just to be overtaken by work, and always having something that you can see that just reminds you of work all the time, like you never get a break from it. I just instinctively knew that I wanted something that we could like shut off and not see anymore, and be able to like actually just relax our brains for a little bit. And I think that's a really good tip. Like, even if you can't do that, having like maybe even like shutting the lid of your laptop, or just tidying your desk up and putting things away, I think is a really good way of physically saying to your brain, like, okay, I'm done now, that's it, now I'm going to go and do something else and take a break. I think that's a really important factor for like to be able to separate your work and your non-work life.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think it's kind of, otherwise your sort of relaxing time is, you're basically just hanging out in your office for the weekend, and no one wants to do that. And so I think it's just like this community, because starting this up, just because, as you're right, there's so many little things when you're, as composers, it's quite a solitary work lifestyle, and you can kind of get lost in your thoughts, and you can be writing a piece of music and not even sure if it's good or not, and making friends through this group of composers who then you can kind of get close enough to where you would trust them on, sending over a track that you've been working on just for thoughts. Like I know I got a few friends that I went to music college, so I've got my friends were musicians, and I sort of respect their opinion. Sometimes I might ask them, "Oh, what do you think to this?" But just having I don't know if you guys do that at all, or ever like send tracks or initial ideas over to someone close, just for their opinion, if you think it's rubbish or not, or just for a fresh pair of ears on something. I think it's totally really useful because, it's, at least it means that the first person who hears it is not going to maybe be the production company. If you have any doubts at all, you can just be like, I just want to run this by you, see if you think it's like this is working. And I think just and allowing a wider, this to form a wider friendship group amongst people, and more people to meet other people who are like-minded. It's kind of what university does, when you're at uni. That's what's so awesome about the first year, because you're sort of put in this scenario where no one knows anyone, and you're all hanging around everyone, and everyone's like-minded, and then you just sort of thrive and buzz. And so when you're, working as a composer, like, because as well as Ollie was saying, there's this inherent competitive streak that sometimes happens. You wouldn't just suddenly go out, or maybe you would, but not often would you just sort of contact a composer you've never ever met before. Hey man, do you want to go for a pint? Just sort of off. I mean, maybe you would do, I don't know, but like, but at least this allows that sort of to happen in a little bit more of a natural way. And you never know, like you might go for a drink with someone, just really like hit it off with someone, and then suddenly become really great mates.
Yeah, I think you're completely right, Paul. That's definitely one of the ideas behind starting the CWC, is to open up the industry a bit more. And yeah, like exactly, when in such a competitive industry, the more we know each other, and the more times we've met each other, and we know, and we've had open, honest conversations, it actually makes you feel kind of less alone and less isolated, when you feel like you work in a community. Yes, you're competing for the same work, but you are all one community, and you're all doing the same thing with the same sort of pressures and problems, and you can sort of celebrate wins together. And you sort of think, I've spoken to other composers who will go for a job, and then they find out that someone has got it, and they know them, and actually it's kind of like, well, yeah, they're a good bloke, and I'm happy for them, and I'll get the next one or whatever. And actually it creates a much nicer environment to work in. And that was definitely one of the ideas behind creating this. And hopefully at some point, we'll be able to do some in-person events where we can meet each other and form more of a community. And like you say, who knows what can come from that. You might hit it off with someone, it might be the start of a great writing partnership or whatever, and that would be amazing for us. So yeah, I think we're gonna kind of wrap up there. Thank you so much for your time, Paul, and to Benji and Ollie, although you kind of have to do this. You're tied in. So thank you for watching. You can follow the Composer Wellbeing Collective on Instagram and Twitter. Instagram is @Composer Wellbeing Collective, and Twitter is Composer WLBNG. And we will be doing some more conversations in the near future, so stay tuned, and thanks for watching.